All right. It is my pleasure to talk to Nerissa. And I thought of Nerissa immediately when I thought about this whole idea of leadership and leading from within your organization, because Nerissa is just exemplifies that. So I am so thankful that you said yes to this. Thank you, Nerissa.
You're welcome. Happy to be here.
Awesome. So I just wanted to start by having you share a little bit about yourself and kind of what brought you and your professional journey to where you are today.
Yeah. Okay, I'll try and do it quickly. I was born in the Philippines and I immigrated to actually the Palo Alto area with my family when I was just before I turned 2 years old. I was the youngest of four, and my parents really, it's the typical immigrant story. They really struggled with resources, especially in an affluent area like Palo Alto. It was hard growing up with limited resources in that area. My dad actually couldn't find a job, so we ended up moving back to the Philippines. And so I was raised really by my mom for a while. Anyway, I got my BA in psychology at UC Santa Barbara, and I moved down to San Diego and was an ABA therapist for a while. And I really realized that I loved working with children and families. I was doing stuff in the home and at school. And I also loved being in the classroom, I noticed. And I moved back to the Bay Area to be close to my family because my dad was, struggling with his health and dealing with cancer. So I wanted to be close to family. And that's when I applied to SF State and got my master's in early childhood special education and teaching credential. And I decided I wanted to go back into the classroom to understand better how to work with a group of children, especially because I was going into classrooms and thinking about one child at a time. And I kept running into teachers being like, well, have you ever taught? I'm like, well, no, I haven't. I've only worked one-on-one with kids. And so I knew that I was missing this critical piece if I wanted to continue working with children and in school settings. I needed to get that experience. So then after that, I got my first teaching job with Newark Unified School District as a special ed preschool teacher with an autism focus. I did early intervention for a little bit with West Contra Costa County, learned a lot there, and then was at San Francisco Unified School District in a cross-categorical SDC classroom.
I think that's where I met you. I think I think you had finished the program by the time I came, but then I got to go into your classroom with student teachers.
Yes. I loved taking student teachers because I always learned a lot that way. And I feel like I really learned a lot in that position. It was a different group of students and families that I was working with when I worked transferred from Newark Unified to San Francisco. Right. And then I got pregnant and had my own child, and knew that I wanted to take the year off. But while I was on maternity leave, I think I just, all these years working with children and working with parents, I just had this huge paradigm shift of really what it means to be a parent, and how I really wanted to focus on parent voice and realizing what it felt like to become a mother and navigate this space and that vulnerability and all the questions and guilt and feelings of loneliness, and then going to all these mommy and me classes, and realizing I was often in spaces of mostly more affluent, mostly white families, and kind of really starting to think more about my career path and what I wanted, and taking my experience in the classroom. I loved being in the classroom, but I also knew that I wanted to shift and really focus on have more balance to focus on my family as well. And the opportunity to work at the primary school came up, and they actually wanted to hire me as a special ed preschool teacher. But I approached them because I knew that they were thinking about building out their Birth to Three program. And I actually went in for an informational interview with the school team, and they were trying to sell me hard on being a preschool teacher. And I, really was like, I actually am really interested in focusing earlier because I see the missing piece. I often, as a special ed preschool teacher, I often got students in the middle of the year that just got a diagnosis, and they were or they just turned 3 and transferred to the school district, or they're 4 or 5 years old, and they would come and it was their first time in a school setting. So dealing with that piece, but then the missing piece I felt was these parents coming with their children and processing for the first time a diagnosis, just going through the early intervention process and feeling really overwhelmed and not being able to have the resource or time that I wanted to develop that relationship and really work with the parents to help support the kids. And that's such a key piece. What we're doing in the classroom, we were only with the kids for 4 or 5 hours, and then what, so yeah, I just kind of saw this missing piece of partnership with families. And so when I learned about the primary school, they really center everything around the families, the relationship with the family. And then they also pull in together the health piece, which is wonderful because I had a lot of medically fragile kids in my classroom, and I'm reading through their files, and you can read a bunch of files, but you don't really get the essence of a child unless you can talk to their healthcare provider. And there was a lot of red tape around all that. And, trying to get information from parents, I felt like it was just another burden on them to kind of figure it out or help me get access to their pediatrician or a nurse to talk to. So just hearing that an organization is trying to really think about things differently with the parents in center really spoke to me, and I got really excited about what we could potentially do there. So I joined them, and yeah, I kind of pitched this idea of this program called Bridge to Preschool, where I wanted to focus on kids and families, the 6 or 4 months, the months leading up to preschool, to make sure that, well, first of all kids get an assessment so that we know what their needs may be. But then also knowing that just because they get an assessment or a screening doesn't mean that you're catching all the kids. And then if you look at the discrepancy of who is accessing early intervention services and who's not, it's clear that Black and Brown families are not accessing the same services. Or even if they go through that evaluation process, they may not tap into those services at the same rate for so many different reasons, right? And so I really wanted to create a program that was just more accessible and less stigmatizing of early intervention, right? Where we really could build relationships with families and have them understand not what's wrong with their kid or not what label do they need to get for their kid to get certain services, but kind of what does their kid need? What is their kid like? What are they motivated for? And what supports do they need in place so that they could have a successful transition into preschool? What do the parents need as well, right? So, so yeah, it was just this really fun opportunity to kind of, build out this program that really focused on families and kids, and also getting information to the preschool teachers. Because when you get a student in your classroom, oftentimes they would just kind of, a couple days before, oh, you're getting a new student. And then you're like trying to read through their IEP and get to know their kid, the child, and figure out how to set up your classroom and receive them in a good way. But there's a lot of missing information there. And so, yeah, just thinking about like what information can we get to preschool teachers so that they feel really confident in being able to support the student in the way that they need. What supports have been tried, what supports work well, what is triggering for the student, how about the best way to communicate with the family, all those things are really critical pieces of information I wish I had before a student would come in. And I know that we're supposed to, you know, get all that information in the IEP, but you don't always get that information in the IEP or in the transitional IFSP to IEP. You don't always get the luxury of meeting those families. It runs a wide gamut, and it's typically the, you know, the families that, you know, lack more resource or are more impacted by racism or classism, that you don't have as much information about for different reasons. But yeah, anyway, I kind of all over the place.
No, I think that's great. I feel like that shows just your journey and then how you kind of, well, you just saw this need for this program. And what a cool thing that there was just space, and also that you just had the confidence to say, like, hold it, I see this, like, and that the school would provide this opportunity. I think it's just such an awesome thing. So when I think about this, I kind of think it mirrors a little bit in this class how the students are going to take on an inquiry project that's smaller, but really they're doing kind of the same thing on a smaller scale, where they're looking at the setting that they're in and identifying what's something that they know that there's like great potential to change or to be change agents, and what is it that they want to do. And then they're going to try and take little steps into kind of working on that. So when I think then about, you had this idea, bridge to preschool, and really had kind of this, from your experiences and what you were seeing, you really knew what you wanted this program to do. I'm curious then, how, when they hired you then, what were the steps then? Like, how did you start? I know you piloted some things. I know you also ran into a pandemic throughout it, which also through very real life, though that probably a grander scale than we all could have imagined. But yeah, I'm curious, like, how did you start? How did you get buy-in? How did you decide the different, like, how you were going to take this on so you could actually implement it?
Yeah, well, I feel really lucky. I feel really lucky to have joined the primary school at the prime time that I did. They were just trying to build out this birth to three programming. But I would say, yeah, just identifying a problem, or, you know, like a missing link, and coming up with a solution, and just trying it, you know. This will be, you know, we just completed the 4th iteration of Bridge to Preschool. And so knowing that the first thing you do, it doesn't have to be perfect. You just have to do it. You know, you can't, it can't be perfect. That's not how it works. You know, it has to constantly be changing, and you need to get feedback from families, feedback from staff. But yeah, we basically I just thought of, well, let's make this mirror a preschool routine. And you know, I was really left alone to figure things out that first year, which, you know, which my organization really, they acknowledged that was a mistake in a lot of ways. You know, like, really, you should be always developing things more collaboratively. And I did the best I could. I you know, I worked really closely with the school team, but I took the initiative to do that. So that's like a big thing. Whatever you like, just taking the initiative to find solutions, and asking questions, asking a lot of questions. I would invite myself to meetings that I wasn't invited to. So, and that was really, really critical. And, you know, I remember talking to some other coworkers. They're like, hey, I wasn't invited to that meeting. I was like, I just show up because it's information I want to know. Right. And they're like, really? I'm like, yeah, I mean, just ask the person, whoever's leading that meeting, if you can join. And most of the time they're just busy and not thinking about it and don't want to bother other people. And so that was like a big mind shift for me, especially you know, as a immigrant, raised poor, woman of color, youngest of 4. I always think I'm like not accepted in a spot, or not supposed to be somewhere, or and taking up too much space or whatever, but kind of inserting yourself in an assertive way where you think it could be helpful for you to know the information that's being shared, or to be able to contribute to the information that's being shared. And that was a lot of personal growth for me. It felt really uncomfortable to kind of be like, wait, can I join that PD so I know what's happening at this school so I can do the same thing for this program? And Yeah, and I do think it's all about relationships. It's all about relationships, of course, obviously with the families and the children, but with your coworkers, because
Hmm.
everybody comes with a different perspective. So kind of understanding what's their perspective and taking it into account when you're trying to decide what to do. Um, but I think the biggest thing is like just deciding to do something, just
Hmm.
deciding and knowing, especially if you're like a recovering perfectionist, you know, like it, you
Yeah.
can't, you kind of just got to start somewhere and know that, and have the courage to know that mistakes are an opportunity for growth. And that's what I love about our organization. You know, we have 5 values: um, excellence, growth, courage, community, and soul.
Mhm.
And so, you know, it's very transparent that they welcome mistakes because that's a part of growth.
Yeah.
And I think that's a huge thing, especially as you take on more leadership, to like, humility is so important. And I think that if I could go back to when I first graduated, I wish that someone really hammered that into my head a little bit more, because I think that when you're starting off, you want to establish yourself and you want to assert yourself. So there's this fine line of confidence you're trying to build up for yourself. You know, that whole saying like fake it till you make it. I think that that makes sense to an extent, to kind of like believe in yourself in some way,
Hmm.
but it has to live equally with knowing that there's so much you don't know.
Yeah.
And there's so much to always learn. Every, you know, there, any opportunity is an opportunity to learn. And I think if you keep putting that at the forefront of your profession, like, you're only going to keep getting better. So
That's so
yes.
wise. That's such a wise thing, Nerissa. When I think about like doing a program like you did, I think about the importance, and you kind of touched on this, of how important collaboration, networking, and like
Mhm.
getting buy-in from the people that are around you. And I just think about that. I know you do that well, like even getting to meet the speech pathologist that you work with and Anna, and hearing from her. Um, but how do you like, what do you think the key is to that? Because obviously to take on something like this, you need buy-in and partnerships with a whole bunch of colleagues and also the families that are part of this. So
Mhm.
what do you think was effective in doing that when you were starting this program?
Um, I mean, I think just approaching it with humility. Again, like, you have
Yeah.
so much that you can learn from everybody around you. Everyone around you, anyone around you, you know. Um, and it you know, I just recently heard this in a PD, but like, people matter most. You know, you start with the relationships. If you think about when you're teaching in class, like, you know, when I was teaching and a child would come, those first 2 weeks were always about that foundational relationship. You have to build a strong relationship, right? Because if you
Right.
don't have that relationship and that trust and that buy-in, then you're not going to go anywhere. And so you have to start there. You have to start with a strong, good relationship. And
Mhm.
so remembering that people are not just their title and not just their job, that they have a life outside of
Right.
this work, and kind of seeing people for who they are, and really um, placing importance on that relationship building. I think, you know, you always have to start there. Um, you know, like I said, that first year, I was really uh, more left on my own, and I was working with a parent wellness coach. But after that, we just kind of added more and more people to the team, because we were able to kind of get that buy-in to be able to allocate more resource. Um, and it was by, well, maybe this, anyway, one thing I would think about is, you know, I joined the social committee. We started a social committee, and
Yeah.
I was only working part-time. And, you know, part of me was like, is this really a good use of my time? It seems frivolous. But
Yeah.
honestly, it's so important. It's so important for people working together to have good relationships with one another.
Right.
And, you know, it felt kind of cheesy, and, you know, all these icebreakers, they always feel kind of cheesy or forced, but really you have to have that, because if you don't know who you're working with, it's going to be difficult, and you need to have those good, strong lines of communication. So, now that a thing that we start with now whenever we have new staff is a training piece is all about your best work self. And so getting people to understand and share about themselves personally, and how what they need to be their best work selves, and so that we know how to communicate with one another. Everyone's different. Some people really like communicating through email. Some people really like communicating through GChat. Some people really like communicating through text message, and finding out what those people like and how you can support them to be their best work self will help support you, right? So yeah, I guess just kind of always, I would constantly be emailing other people or approaching them in person and asking them questions, like, well, what do you think about this? Just I would go and meet up with the occupational therapist or the speech therapist and just be like, hey, what do you think about this? Hey, can I pick your brain about this? And asking permission. And most of the time, people are really generous with sharing their perspective and their knowledge. And so taking advantage of that. So understanding that you have a lot to learn from everyone. Yeah.
I feel like, when I'm just reflecting and thinking about things that you're saying, like the idea of making space to get to know people, asking them for insight, like knowing that the humility, so knowing that they are going to be able to contribute their expertise to it. And then they also get buy-in, right? If they know that they're being heard. And I also just think about how important, like if you all have a shared dialogue about what is your best person at work, or like, what do you need to be? And you have like core values that are like, I mean, even that you can say them just off the top of your head like this makes me think about how many organizations have core values, but like they're not like part of the dialogue, right? But if there's actually like a sharedness with that, then you all of a sudden, you all know what you're striving for, and you all know that mistakes are okay. It just feels like you're setting a climate up, you're this foundation to just collaborate, and that it's okay if we don't know everything, we're going to do it together. It's okay if we make mistakes. It just feels so healthy, Nerissa, when I think about working in a place like that. It just feels like there's some really key foundational things there. One other thing that just came to mind. So as you took on this program and you were saying that you're done the fourth cycle of it, how did you know what was working and what you wanted to change or revise? So maybe it's collecting data, or also just like both formally and probably informally. How did you know what was working and when you needed to make changes?
Yeah, I mean, we're always iterating. We're lucky to have a data and learning team that supports us, and so we are all about collecting data and trying to be really thoughtful about it as well, because collecting data does take time for the families, and so we have what's called exit tickets. So we build into our programming these exit tickets that families fill out at the end of programming, because we really want their voices to be central. We want to know whether or not they felt like this was a good use of their time. We want to know, any feedback they have. And, over the years, we've gotten better at getting that information too, because when you keep things kind of open-ended, people are like, oh, it's fine, it's great, but trying to be a little bit, like having drop-down menus as prompts of like, what would you like more time doing this, more time doing XYZ. So yeah, we do these exit tickets with families. We also take pre and post data of the children and the families, and kind of understand that, and analyze that and see what's working. And then we work closely with the parent wellness coaches on things like engagement and attendance. So we think about everything, like the recruitment, what went well, what didn't. The timings that we're offering the programming, what went well, what didn't, and like the makeup of the groups, how many kids we have. So everything we kind of scrutinize and see, well, did that work well? Did it not work well? And it's always a conversation as well, with the team. But yeah, a lot of pre and post data to figure that out.
Yeah, that seems so important. It just seems important to know, to inform yourself, like what is going well. And I feel like we're pretty good in early childhood. Like it's reflection gets drilled into us pretty early,
Yeah.
but it just seems like how important that is to reflect and then be thinking about, and it doesn't have to be big standardized assessments, just like informally, even how are you checking in with people, whether this is working
Yeah.
or not? How are you making choices on what needs to be changed or
Yeah.
not? So yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and you can we can tweak things week by week because we get those exit tickets live. And if
Yeah.
a parent's like, oh, I'd love more video examples, then I'm scrambling to get more video examples for the
Yeah.
next week, or you know, anything like that. And we also have midpoint check-ins with the families to kind of
Mhm.
see particularly, you know, how it's been going and what they would like to focus on for the next few weeks. And so we try and have kind of a skeleton of things that we're doing, but also tweak it to what the needs are of that particular group or those particular families.
That feels super responsive and pretty mirrors a little bit about good teaching, right? Or good
Yeah.
interventionists, like where you're doing
Yeah.
every week or even in the session or in that morning, tweaking it to what the kids need from you.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Is there anything else that I have not asked about or anything else that you wanted to share about this?
Yeah, you know, I think a big thing that and it's like a clear kind of theme that I've been noticing. You know, we've been interviewing for new positions, and as I interview people, you know, we're a lot of times looking for certain things, and I think it'd be, you know, beneficial to kind of talk about those things, right? And so I've already talked about humility.
Yeah.
We're always looking for people who can acknowledge that there's still a lot to learn and that they don't
Yeah.
know everything, and you know, they know certain things, but they also have the initiative to seek out answers for what they don't know, or be able to say, hey, that's a great question, I'll get back to you, and really like learn about it instead of trying to scramble to sound like they know something that they don't really
Yeah.
fully grasp. um, Another one that I've talked a lot about in these interviews is like this idea of unlearning.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, you know, especially with the, you know, what's been going on around the world lately, like it's very clear that there's a lot of unlearning to do,
Mm-hmm.
especially if you're trying to innovate. If you're trying to innovate in a space and come up with solutions to gaps or issues that are arising, there's a lot that you have to unlearn, you know,
Mm-hmm.
especially when it comes to leadership. Like I would never consider myself a leader. I hate leadership. Like I like, you know, it makes me really nervous. Like my heart beats like thinking of leadership. And it's because I've attached leadership to authority and have like a, you know, kind of it's just kind of anyway, I've had to unlearn what it means to be a leader. I've had to unlearn um you know, what it means to take up space. I've had to unlearn just prejudices and stereotypes that I've always had in my mind. You know, that's the biggest commitment for me this particular school year. My commitment was to our core value of courage, and
Mm-hmm.
my thing was that I'm going to um, really focus on the courage of kind of contradicting my own pattern of what it means to be an immigrant, raised poor woman of color, right? Like in
Mm-hmm.
my mind, if I think that I don't deserve to be in a space, I can't hold on to that. I can't hold on to that mindset because if I hold on to that mindset, I'm doing a disservice to all the immigrant women of color raised poor that I work with. I can't think that someone like me can't take up more space or have a good mind or share my thinking, right? So kind of realizing you know, what are you holding on to? What stories in your mind are you holding on to that are holding you back that would eventually hold families you work with back?
Mm-hmm.
And unlearning them, like unlearning those unhelpful patterns,
Yeah.
because you know we're in it, we're thick in all these oppressions, right? So being aware of it and doing your part, doing your internal work to be able to contradict them so that you can show up for other people.
Yeah. That's so wise. And I am glad that you I think that's just a powerful example to show of how you're doing that. And then in turn, like, I think I'm still struck by the confidence and obviously the unlearning that you are sharing that you did, that you were able to go into that meeting with the primary school and say like, oh, I really like the idea of a preschool, but listen, I have this idea that I'm really passionate about. And then just because of your courage to do that, what has then transpired is pretty amazing. When you think about what's gone on now with Bridge to Preschool. What do you want to share? Do you want to share just your goals for that program or the work that you are now taking on with the primary school for your final?
Yeah. So, we just completed the 4th iteration of Bridge to Preschool. It was all virtual this year, which we learned a lot. I was really hesitant to do that, but we did learn quite a lot. And actually, it was more focused on parents and parent groups. So, we weren't able to do as much in-person child dual gen stuff that we were hoping to do, but we learned that it was helpful for parents to be able to have these opportunities to hop on virtually. We had parents joining on their lunch break or while they were making dinner. So we're like, oh, if we add that as an option, we might be able to include more parents in the programming. So there's always things to learn, right? But yeah, so we're going strong with our East Palo Alto site. This will be the first, next year will be the first year that we try to do Bridge to Preschool at our new Hayward site. We just completed this first pilot in San Francisco. We are partnering with Children's Council of San Francisco, Wu Yi, and SFUSD to hopefully do another pilot this next year, and train more organizations to implement it themselves. And so I have a lot of goals, but we also are working with a policy team. We want to be able to eventually change policy so that this is available on public funding, and really kind of highlight, like, research always shows how important it is to start early. Research always shows how important it is to partner with parents, but there's not a lot that's actually there are programs doing it, but we need more. We need more programming. We need more programming available to more families. And so that's our goal, is to be able to kind of do this well, keep iterating, keep improving, and be able to screen more families and provide Bridge to Preschool to more children and families, and more organizations. That would be my goal.
That's exciting. Thanks, Nerissa. I just really appreciate you sharing all about this.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. It's always so fun to talk with you.
Awesome.